Not very much going on this Friday afternoon. A series of frontal systems working through the eastern U.S., bringing 40s and 50s into that region. Across the Great Plains, a warm-up as some meager tropical air starts flowing up into Oklahoma and Texas. And out in the western U.S., things destabilizing once again with a powerful weather system coming in from the Pacific. We can see that the dry line is not very well established. Looking at some poor moisture, 40s dew points along the length of that, but just enough to get some storms going in New Mexico. SPC does have a slight risk out for that part of the country, extending from about Clayton, New Mexico, out towards Canadian Texas. And that's due to a risk of storms with strong outflow winds, as we have a situation with inverted V type soundings, lots of dry air, and very steep lapse rates. A big problem that we've had over the past few days has been a lack of moisture. You can see the precipitable waters over 1 inch has been shunted all the way into the central Gulf, leaving us with very little moisture on the Great Plains. The highest readings we're seeing western Oklahoma there with about 1 inch. And this time of year we should be seeing quite a bit more than that. What little moisture we have in place across the southern plains extends all the way back towards the Sangre de Cristos, and as a result we've had some storms initiate over those mountains, and those have moved across the Las Vegas, New Mexico area, Trinidad, and out towards Clayton. And that's where we have the storms at this hour, Naravisa up to Clayton and over to Elkhart, Kansas. And there's what the radar looks like. Obviously not very impressive. However, these storms will have the potential for quite a bit of outflow. So we should see some gusty winds right around these storms due to the presence of a lot of dry air in the environment combined with very steep lapse rates. Now, to see what we're talking about specifically, we can bring up a forecast skew-t right out ahead of these storms. And there it is. That's a classic inverted V. Some decent moisture up near 15 to 18,000 feet or so. Down below that, a lot of dry air. And as a result, you can see the effective inflow layer right here, a very, very deep layer going up from about 3,000 to 4,000 MSL up to about 14,000. And by the time it gets up to the LCL, you've got a little bit of cape in that region right there. So these are certainly high-based thunderstorms. Most of the strong vertical velocities occurring right up there, 15 to 20,000 feet. And eventually the downdraft does make it down to the surface. And where's the decay? Yeah, it's right there, 1,400. That is quite high. So that means we're going to generate some strong downdrafts for sure. However, the limited availability of the moisture means we're not going to generate large cold pools that will drive the system into the I-35 area. Most of this should stay confined up near I-40 from the Panhandles into western Oklahoma. And you can see it there on the high-resolution rapid refresh. That's the mesoscale model. The general trend taking that eastward into the dusk hours, early mid-evening, and everything dissipates before it gets into the Stillwater, Oklahoma City, and Lawton area. And then just kind of a quiet night after that. And you can see by the pressure field, we are seeing cyclogenesis up there in Colorado, the lee side trough getting established, and return flow underway. Do we have a low-level jet? We'll go up to 850 millibars and see what happens overnight. The wind field does accelerate overnight. But by dawn, we're seeing widespread 40-knot winds. Pretty much this entire region looks like 40 knots. Now, to actually look at the moisture itself, we need to go to the GFS. We really don't get the full fields on the other models. So let's see here. Moisture, 850 millibar dew point. And that'll kind of give us an idea what we're looking at. Sparse moisture most of that confined to northeastern Mexico. And it looks like a little plume of it heads up into Oklahoma this evening, and you can see some dry air starting to get mixed up with those thunderstorms in the Panhandles. Then they shut down overnight. We start out pretty dry in the Dallas area. The moisture could be down in the lower levels. Remember, this is up at 850, about 5,000 MSL. But we see upstream, there's just not really much moisture. Now, it appears when we get the mixing during the day by 18Z, it does start showing up. So I think we're seeing maybe some deepening of that boundary layer. And that's enough to certainly get us a well-developed dry line out there from about Alva down to Quanah and down towards Big Spring. Now let's look at 925. I think that might give us a slightly different picture. Extensive moisture. This is almost like a June-July pattern out there in the higher elevations. Let's see. We get the mixing and appearance of dry air out in West Texas. Then let's see overnight. Yeah, there is some moisture return. Now, since we did not see this at 850, it's kind of shallow. But there it is heading into San Antonio and the Hill Country overnight. And looks like a surge heading up into Dallas, College Station. And again, this is shallow, doesn't extend up to 850 yet. And then by 18Z, yeah, that gives us a dry line in that earlier mentioned area. And we can drop a sounding there. Let's try around the Wichita Falls area to see what that sounding looks like. And it does show capping. The moisture return, not too bad, but it's a lot of 50s dew points there. And then above that, pretty pronounced capping and convective inhibition up to about 150 to 200. So to look at that cap, we're going to go up to 700. So these are the elements you would look at on a chase day. So overnight, here comes a plume of warm air that's been carried off the plateau region, the thermal ridge right there. And that's going to be comprised of, looks like maybe 13 to 15 Celsius. And that gets carried up into Oklahoma. Some indication of convection developing out around Vernon down towards Haskell. But yeah, that is quite a bit of warm air over the southern plains tomorrow. And there's what the soundings look like. Some definite capping there, but if you did break that cap, some decent instability. Now, to find if that cap's going to break, we can go to the GFS preset panels and just get a general idea of what it's showing. And the cap does not break except out there near San Angelo. And just checking that against the ARW. Yeah, the ARW has this little cluster forming around Fort Stockton and Iran Bakersfield. And this may be what the GFS is trying to pick up on there. It looks like this stuff, ARW has that dissipating around dark. And this is interesting, a little cluster up there near Quanah, Vernon, Altus, right around dark, and then moving off towards eastern Oklahoma very quickly by 1 a.m. And you can see that fast motion. That indicates to me that it is kind of elevated. And the second question is what's going to happen up in Kansas for tomorrow? So there's those dew points struggling to get up into the 60s in Oklahoma. However, yeah, we are getting 60s even up there in Topeka. I think that's probably the contribution from evapotranspiration. And even late in the afternoon, 60s and upper 50s holding on around Topeka. And we see storms developing. There they are around late afternoon, around Concordia, moving eastward towards Topeka and St. Joseph in Kansas City. The environment, what that looks like, let's check out a sounding around Topeka. And that's not really too bad. Some decent moisture trailing off into 50s, and it's quite deep, up to about 7,000 feet. There is a capping inversion, and some steep lapse rates above that, and looks like plenty of cape for some severe weather. And you can see on the photograph there, backing and shear SRH elevated. So those are all good indicators. Now, one problem, well, the D-capes are elevated there also. So there is some dry air interplaying with these storms, and that means we're going to see probably some outflowish dominant cells within this mix. So let's go to the GFS and grab another forecast sounding in the Concordia area. And one thing that I'm seeing here, even though it's indicating the good shear, the steep lapse rates, the other problem is the LFC is up there quite high. You can see here where I've chosen this sounding, it's up above 10,000 feet. And typically when we see this, tornado potential is going to be pretty low, and you'll certainly get rotating storms and meso kind of elevated, but not much else going on except for some wind, maybe some hail, and of course some heavy rain. So it looks like for tomorrow they've got that region that we talked about near the nose of that moisture and maybe southward along the front in dry line. But as I've mentioned, it's just not the ideal setup for tornadoes. I would like to see that steep lapse rates, the bottom part of that Cape area, I'd like to see that a lot lower. And I would like to see those LCLs down around 1,000, not near 1,500 to 2,000. At this hour, the southwestern U.S. looking pretty good. However, up in the northern Nevada deserts, some instability there. That's normally something we do not see this time of year, and that's because we have an upper-level disturbance working across that region, and that will interact with the weather in the Great Plains this weekend. In Texas, no sign of the low-level moisture, except for a little band there around Rockport and Corpus Christi. Just a little cirrus debris from old storms out to the west, moving over the state. And we can see very little in the way of low clouds feeding that complex up there in the Panhandles. Florida looking unusually clear at this hour due to the infusion of cold, dry air into the state, but down around Miami, some storms going up in that region, and that's along the remnants of that front extending back out across the Bahamas. Cold air advection continuing over Virginia and the Carolinas, and some of the instability along that boundary, producing some anvils, some shallow cumulonimbus clouds in that region. And in the northeast U.S., looking at the low cloud field, some indication of cyclonic turning, and even though it's not really apparent on the thickness charts, it does look like there is a small weather system, a baroclinic system, in southern New York and Pennsylvania. And across the Great Lakes area, some extensive cold air advection. Cumulonimbus clouds across the land masses, while the lakes are fairly clear. And a quasi-geostrophic disturbance working its way across Michigan, interacting with cold 30s temperatures across northern Michigan, and some of the colder conditions in the upper levels. In the northern plains, that region under the influence of that ridge, cold air coming southward through that area. And in the central Rockies, an unstable pattern through that region, lots of cumulus and cumulonimbus clouds due to the presence of cool air aloft and some disturbances working through that region. And there's those disturbances we're talking about on the 500 millibar heights and vorticity chart. Some weak ones moving through the Rockies and then stronger ones as you go out towards the west. And that will eventually break down that ridge in the high plains, and then we'll see some upper level energy starting to interact with that stuff out in the central plains this weekend. And as we head into this weekend, remember that this is going to be the last episode before we hit the break, which is going to start this weekend. Now, I talked a bit about that on the Tuesday webcast, but that is going to be absolutely necessary for me to catch up with books and software. The Patreon supporters, you will continue to get some videos during that period. I'll try to work some daily videos in here and there. And when we have significant severe weather, like a moderate or high risk on the Great Plains, we'll try to cover that. I really do need to take the break. However, I realize that the Patreon supporters do need a little bit of a reward for helping to support the program. So there we are. Now, as far as when we're going to come back, I think that'll probably be around June 1st. Could be as early as the last week of May. Could be the first or second week of June. I'm not exactly sure. But we will come back to normal here 2 to 4 weeks from now. So if you want to keep catching the program, you can head to our Patreon, and I'll put up that link right there. Once you're signed up, you will get the videos over the next couple weeks. Otherwise, we'll see you again around late May or early June. Hope you have a great one. Take care, and we will see you later. Bye-bye.